the cardiac monitor stopped pretending. For 3 days, it had drawn its ragged little mountains across the screen, and now it simply lay down flat and screamed. One long electronic note that filled the trauma bay like water filling a sinking room. 2 surgeons stepped back from the table. A third kept his hands inside the man's chest a moment longer than the others, then withdrew them. Gloves slicked to the wrist, and looked at the clock the way men look at a thing they have already lost an argument with. He had no name on his chart. The line where a name should go read only Althor 7, and the men standing along the wall in civilian suits had made it clear that the name was not coming, not tonight, not for any of them. But the woman wiping down the instrument tray in the corner of that room knew exactly who he was, because she had spent the last 72 hours reading him the way other people read scripture, and she had figured out the thing that 12 doctors with better letters after their names had not. His real name was Wesley Kane. He was 34 years old, a sniper out of a unit that did not officially deploy to the place he had been wounded, and 4 nights ago, he had been carried off a C-130 onto the tarmac of a military hospital on Okinawa with a chest that looked like it had been opened with a garden tool. And right now, 3 days later, he was not dying the way the doctors thought he was dying. The woman in the corner was named Margot Kessler. To everyone at Camp Foster who knew her, Margot was the kind of person your eyes skated over. 31. Brown hair she kept in a knot that was always coming loose. A face that photographed badly and aged well, the kind that bartenders forgot and old women trusted. She had transferred onto the night shift in the surgical ICUJ 11 weeks earlier, from somewhere in the Midwest, and she was good at her job in the quiet way that good night nurses are good, which is to say nobody noticed until the morning came and everyone she'd touched was still breathing. She charted neatly. She didn't gossip. When the new residents asked her how long she'd been nursing, she said 6 years and changed the subject, and that was true, as far as it went. What the personnel office did not have in any drawer they could open was the part of Margot's life that came before nursing school, for 7 years before she ever held a stethoscope. Margot Kessler had been a cryptologic linguist and signals analyst attached to a special mission unit, the kind of soldier who never carried a rifle into a room, but who could tell you, from a fragment of radio chatter, and the way a man cleared his throat before he keyed his mic, whether he was lying. She had spent those years in windowless vaults, learning the private languages that operators use to talk to each other and to no one else. Duress codes, challenge and response sequences, the modified tap ciphers that captured men used to whisper through prison walls so the guards would hear only knocking. She had been very good at it. She had also, on one deployment that she did not talk about to anyone, ever, watched what happened when those languages failed and the people speaking them died for it. She had come home, turned in her badge, and decided she would spend the rest of her life putting hands on the living instead of ears on the dying. So, she had been standing in the corner that first night, holding a warm cloth, watching the surgeons fight a war they didn't know they were losing. She had watched Dr. Elias Renner, a good surgeon, a careful one, a man who had stitched together more broken soldiers than most field hospitals see in a year, push epinephrine into Wesley Kane's line to drag his heart back up, and she had watched the heart do the opposite of what epinephrine makes a heart do. It slowed. When they cranked the ventilator to force more oxygen into him, his throat clamped shut around the tube as if it had a mind of its own, and that mind wanted him dead. Renner had stood over the monitors, muttering that it made no sense, that the man was bleeding out and going into shock, but his whole body was clamping down like he'd been dropped in an ice bath, like every system in him was shutting its own doors and locking them from the inside. Margot had thought, very quietly, in the corner where no one was looking at her, "They are treating a patient, and that is not what this is." But she had said nothing. She was a night nurse from Ohio. She wiped the man's hand. By the second night, the bleeding was controlled, and the infections were knocked down, and by every chart in the room, Wesley Kane should have been climbing back toward the living, and instead he was sliding the other way, organ by organ, like a man wading out into cold water and not turning around. His kidneys faltered. His pressure crept down no matter what they hung. The brass flew his commanding officer in from the States, a square-shouldered woman named Major Holloway, who stood at the foot of the bed with her cover in her hands and a look on her face that Margot recognized. The look of someone preparing to lose a person she had promised not to lose. The neurologist read the flat lines coming off the EEG and used the word irreversible. They gave him 48 hours and started writing the kind of orders that get written when everyone has agreed, without saying it out loud, that a man is already gone. Margot drew the night shift, because she always drew the night shift. And at 2 a.m. on the third day, the unit was as quiet as it ever got. Just the hum of the machines and the slow funeral drip of the monitor. And she was wiping the iodine and the dried grit out of the creases of his left hand, the only part of him not buried under bandages, when she saw his finger move. It was nothing. A coma patient's hand twitches all the time. The body sends out its random little sparks. She kept wiping. Then it moved again, and this time it was not random, and the back of her neck went cold the way it used to go cold in the vault when a clean signal came up out of the noise. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. She stopped breathing. She set the cloth down very slowly, as if a loud movement might scare it off, and she leaned in over the bed rail and watched his bruised finger the way she had once watched a waveform on a green screen at 3 a.m. with a war on the other end of it. He wasn't seizing. There was a structure to it. There was intent. She pulled the pen out of her scrub pocket and the only paper she had, a folded patient education handout about ventilator weaning, and she flattened it against her thigh and began to transcribe. Her first instinct was Morse, and Morse gave her garbage. A string of letters that spelled nothing, that fell apart in her hands. She crumpled the corner of the page and started again, and on the second pass she heard it, the way you hear your own name in a crowded room. It wasn't Morse. It was a tap cipher, and not the schoolbook 5x5 grid that anybody could pull off a website, but a shifted, classified variant, the kind they taught in the back half of survival school to the small number of men who might one day need to talk through a cell wall to another American without the men holding them ever knowing words were being said. She knew it because she had sat in a windowless room for the better part of a year listening to recordings of men using exactly this, picking their messages apart syllable by syllable, learning to hear hope in the spacing of a knuckle against concrete. Her pen flew. C-O-M-P pause. C-O-M-P-R-O-M-I-S-E-D pause. N-O-D-U-S-T-O-F-F. No dust-off, no medevac. Then slower, the finger dragging now, exhausted. S-A-B-L-E-D-O-W-N. Margot stepped back from the bed and put her hand over her mouth, and for the first time in 3 years, the old life came all the way back into her body at once. Wesley Kane was not in a coma. There was no irreversible brain injury. His mind was not gone. It was hiding. Somewhere in those last minutes on that hillside, shot through the chest. His team dead or dying around him, with the enemy closing in and capture a certainty. His training had reached down past every conscious thought and thrown the deepest switch a soldier can throw. To keep himself from being taken alive, from being broken open and emptied of everything he knew, his nervous system had executed a kind of controlled crash. He had dropped his own heart rate. He had pulled the blood back from his limbs into his core. He had folded himself down into the smallest, darkest room inside his own skull and bolted the door. And now he was sitting in there in the dark, certain he was still on that hill. He did not know he was in a hospital. He did not know the war was, for him, over. The needles in his arms were not IVs to him. They were the first instruments of an interrogation. The beeping monitors were not machines keeping him alive. They were enemy radios. The bright overhead lights were the lights they shine in your face. Every single time these good and careful doctors leaned over him and tried to save his life, they were confirming, in the only world Wesley Kane currently believed in, that the enemy had him and was beginning. So he did the only thing his training had left him to do. He played dead, and he was very, very good at it. That was why his heart slowed when they pushed epinephrine. The drug said fight. His training said stop fighting, go down, go dark, give them nothing. and the training was winning. The doors of the unit swung open. Dr. Renner came in first, with Major Holloway a step behind him and Captain Doyle, one of the men in suits, behind her. Renner's voice was gentle and final, the voice of a man who has already grieved and now only needs the paperwork. Nurse Kessler, we're done. His kidneys are gone, his pressure won't hold, and the major has signed the authorization. We're going to comfort measures. Let's take him off the ventilator and let him go easy. Margot did not move out of the way. Some part of her noticed, almost with surprise, that her body had put itself between the doctor and the bed. He's not in a coma, she said. Renner stopped. He was too tired to be angry yet. Margot, he's not in a coma. Her voice was steady, and it was not the voice of the night nurse from Ohio. It had a flat, certain edge to it that made Captain Doyle's head turn. He's running a resistance protocol. Look at his left hand. He's been tapping a compromise code for the last 20 minutes. He thinks he's a prisoner. He thinks every one of us is the enemy, and every time you try to save him, you're proving it. If you pull that tube, he will let himself die before he lets you have what he's carrying. He'll think he won. The room went very still. Doyle stepped forward, and his easy diplomat's face had gone hard. Nurse. How does a civilian ICU nurse from Ohio know what a SEER compromise code is? Margot looked at him, and she let the cover story fall off her shoulders like a coat she was tired of carrying. Because I used to decode them. 7 years, signals intelligence, attached to a special mission unit. I have transcribed more of that man's kind of traffic than anyone in this room has read about. She turned back to Renner. You've been treating him under bright lights with loud machines, and people putting painful pressure on his body every few hours. From the inside of his head, you have built him a perfect interrogation. He's not deteriorating because his body is failing. He's deteriorating because he is winning the resistance. He is succeeding at dying. That's the only victory he believes is left to him. Renner stared at her. He was a scientist, and what she was saying violated everything on his monitors, and she watched him try to make himself dismiss it and fail because some older instinct in him had heard the ring of truth. Even if you're right, he said slowly, and that is a tremendous if, his body is genuinely failing now. The dissociation or not, the shock is real, the organ failure is real. We have minutes. How do you propose I pull a man out of a psychogenic shutdown that's killing him for real? We convince him he's been rescued, Margot said, and her mind was already 3 steps ahead, sprinting down corridors it hadn't walked in years. We have to authenticate. He won't come up for anyone he can't verify. That's the whole point of the protocol. You don't believe the rescue is real until the rescuer proves they're on your side, because a fake rescue is the oldest trick in the book. Offer to take with what? Doyle said, and now there was something almost desperate under the hardness. His file is blacked out from the cover sheet down. I don't know his unit. I don't know his call sign. I can't get it released over an unsecured line at 2 a.m, and if I could, I wouldn't have it for hours, and you said it yourself, we have minutes. The monitor let out a long warning tone. On the screen, Wesley Kane's heart rate slid out of the 30s and into the 20s, the numbers ticking down like a man stepping off a ledge 1 toe at a time. Margot closed her eyes. She did not need Doyle's file. She had a file of her own, an old one, the kind that doesn't live in a drawer because it lives behind your eyes for the rest of your life. 3 years ago, in the worst weeks of the worst deployment she did not talk about, she had spent her nights inside, intercepted radio traffic out of a stretch of desert nobody could find on a map, and through all of it there had been one signature she came back to, one voice that the analysts on her watch floor had started saving like other people save songs. A sniper element, working impossibly far forward, completely surrounded more than once, and never once panicking. A voice that called in danger close fire on its own position in a tone you'd use to order coffee. The enemy on that net had a name for the man behind that voice, a name that came up again and again in their frightened chatter, the way men name a thing they cannot kill. And the call sign that voice used to authenticate itself, the one she had typed into 100 logs, the one she could still hear in her sleep. Her eyes opened. She pushed past Renner. She did not ask permission, and no one stopped her. She put both her hands flat and firm on Wesley Kane's uninjured left shoulder. Not the soft, frightened touch of a nurse, but the hard, square, deliberate grip of a man hauling another man into a helicopter by his harness. A grip that says, I have you. I am real. I am stronger than what's holding you. She brought her lips down to within an inch of his ear, and when she spoke, she did not speak in her own voice. She borrowed a voice she had only ever heard through headphones, the clipped, unhurried, almost bored cadence of a combat controller talking to a man whose life he is about to save and who he refuses to let hear any fear. It's done, brother, Margot said into his ear. Perimeters secure. Birds are inbound, you are coming home. Stand down, Sable Actual. This is friendly, authenticate Grey Mountain. Come up. The room held its breath. The monitor beeped its slow, dying beep, and the gap between each beep stretched longer, and Renner started to say, Nurse Kessler, step away. And then the line on the screen jumped. It did not climb. It detonated. The slow failing rhythm vanished all at once and was replaced by a violent rising spike. Beep, 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 climbing over itself, and Wesley Kane's chest arched up off the mattress so hard the bed frame jumped, and his left hand, the hand that 30 seconds before had been spelling out the word for his own death against a bed rail, shot up and closed around the collar of Margot's scrubs with a strength that no dying man has any business having. The endotracheal tube hissed. His eyes snapped open, and they were not the dull, drowned eyes of a man at the end. They were wide and dilated and burning with a clarity so ferocious that two of the men along the wall actually flinched. His heart rate climbed from 22 to 140 in the time it takes to read this sentence. And his eyes found Margot's and locked on, and he was awake, all the way awake, dragged up out of the dark by a single string of words that told the soldier in him that he was, against every expectation, finally safe. Pandemonium. Renner came alive, shouting for sedation, lunging for the line, certain this was a final agonal seizure, the last violent spasm of an oxygen-starved brain. But Margot, still pinned by the fist at her throat, never broke eye contact with the man holding her, and she said in that same flat combat voice, "Belay that. He's tracking. Look at his eyes. He's tracking. Nobody push anything." And Renner, God bless him, looked and saw what she saw and held his hand up to stop the room. Wesley Kane stared at the ceiling, at the lights, at the woman his hand was clamped onto, and slowly, the violence went out of his grip and his fingers uncurled from her collar, and something in his face that had been clenched for days came unclenched. His pressure, which had been bottoming out, came up and held. His own breathing began to fight the ventilator in a new way, the seizing refusal of before, but the impatient pushing of a man who wants the tube out so he can talk. Renner, half in disbelief, judged him ready, and they pulled it, and Wesley Kane coughed and gagged and dragged in the first breath he had chosen to take in 3 days. His voice, when it came, was a ruin, barely a whisper, but every person in that room leaned in to catch it. "Where?" he rasped. His eyes went around the room, cataloging exits, weapons, threats, the old habits running even now. They landed on the major at the foot of his bed, and recognition flickered. They landed on the men in suits and went cold. They came back to Margot. "Who are you?" "You can call me Kessler," Margot said quietly. "You tapped out, Sable down, compromised, no dust off. I read it. You're at the military hospital on Okinawa. You've been here 4 days. Your war's over, Sergeant. You made it." Something crossed his face. Grief, mostly, the specific grief of a man learning he survived and suspecting the others didn't. "My team," he said. Major Holloway stepped forward, and her voice cracked on the first word. "You're the only one who came home, Wes." He took that the way men like him take things, with his jaw and nothing else. Then his eyes sharpened again, and he tried to push himself up, and Margot put a hand flat on his good shoulder and held him down, and he let her, which told her more than anything else that he had decided to trust her. "Then listen to me," he said, and his voice found a thread of its old authority. "Listen, because I'm only going to be able to say it once, before they put me back under." His gaze swept the men in suits, and his lip pulled back, and not in front of them. Captain Doyle bristled. "Sergeant, this is a debrief, and we are cleared. You are not cleared for this, Wesley said, and even flat on his back, hollowed out, 3 days from the grave, the venom in it stopped Doyle cold. My mission was a special access program. Need to know. And you, Captain, do not need to know. Get out. He's within his rights, said the older of the suited men, a gray, quiet man named Sorensen, who had not spoken until now. He put a hand on Doyle's arm. If this falls under a covert authorization, we are not read in. None of us are. He looked at Wesley with something like respect. But somebody has to carry it out of this room, son. Who do you trust? Wesley Kane lifted his bruised left hand, the one that had spelled his own death, and pointed one finger across the room at the nurse from Ohio. Her. Margot's breath caught. Sergeant, I'm a civilian now. I don't hold a clearance anymore. I gave it back. You speak the language, Wesley said, looking at her in a way that stripped the scrubs off the analyst underneath. You pulled me up with a 3-year-old call sign and an authentication challenge you weren't supposed to know. If I hand this to a captain who flew in this morning, it goes up standard channels. Standard channels are exactly how my men ended up dead in a place we were never supposed to be. You take it. You know where to put it. The room went quiet in a different way now. Holloway looked at Sorensen. Sorensen looked at Wesley for a long moment, then nodded once, slowly, and turned to the others. Everybody out. Now. And outranked by something older and harder than rank, they went, Doyle last and furious, and the heavy doors sealed shut behind them with a sound like a vault closing. Margot pulled a clean sheet of paper from the chart rack and sat on the edge of the bed and uncapped her pen. And her heart was hammering with a rhythm she thought she'd left behind in a windowless room half a world away. Go, she said softly. Wesley Kane stared at the ceiling and began. Op was a static surveillance of a transfer site. High desert, dry wadi system, I'm not giving you the grid out loud. No engagement authorized. We were eyes only. At 0240, fourth night, they came up the wadi on both flanks at once. Not a patrol that got lucky. A walked ambush, a clean horseshoe, right into our hide. His jaw worked. They had our position to the meter. They took my spotter in the first 3 seconds. We broke contact, fell back to our secondary rally point, and they were already sitting on it. Sitting on it, Kessler. They weren't hunting us. They were waiting for us, at both points. Margot's pen moved without her watching it, the old reflex. They had your locations in advance. Both of them. His eyes closed. Before we crossed the line of departure, our liaison at the staging base flagged enemy jamming on our primary frequency, pushed us onto a new SATCOM channel for our position updates. Said it was cleaner. His voice dropped to almost nothing. Every time we sent a post-rep on that channel, we weren't beating the jamming. We were broadcasting our exact coordinates straight to the people who killed us. The frequency change wasn't protection. It was the trap. Margot felt the cold go all the way down. The liaison sold you. The liaison's network handle is Warden, Wesley whispered. When I took the round, I knew the second I keyed for medevac, the dust-off would fly straight into a missile box they'd already set up. So I didn't key. I buried my radio, I initiated the recovery protocol, and I went dark on purpose. I made myself a dead man on a hill so that whoever they sent next wouldn't walk into the same kill zone trusting the same compromised net. His hand found her wrist. Weak now, but certain. You cannot hand this to Doyle. You cannot route it through the staging base, because Warden lives in the staging base. Use your old channels. Go around. Get it to the command element directly. Tell them Warden's a double. Tell them the POSREP net is burned. Tell them to pull every team running off it before they get walked into a horseshoe of their own. His grip tightened. Tell them my guys didn't die for nothing. Margot folded the paper once, and then again, and slid it into the inner pocket of her scrubs, against her chest, the way she had once carried things that mattered. I've got it, Sergeant, she said. There's a back channel I can still raise. I'll run it through a burn cipher, eyes only to the command element, no relays. I swear to you it doesn't touch Warden's net. I swear it. Wesley Kane looked at her for a long moment, and the ferocity finally drained out of his face, and what was left was just a tired man who had been carrying something alone for too long and had at last found somebody to set it down with. Okay, he breathed. Okay. His eyes started to drift, the adrenaline burning off, the wounded body reclaiming him for the long sleep he actually needed now. "I've got the watch from here, Kessler," he murmured, the words sliding into a soldier's old habit. "You take the comms." "You're relieved, Sergeant," Margot said gently and put her hand over his. "Get some sleep, you're home." She kept that promise, though almost no one ever knew it. The message went where she said it would go, through a door she still knew how to knock on. And somewhere up the chain, a man who outranked everyone in that hospital read 3 sentences in a burned cipher and went very pale and gave an order in the middle of the night that quietly pulled 4 teams off a compromised frequency before any of them could be walked into a wadi. A logistics officer at a staging base disappeared into a process that the public will never read about. The network called Warden came apart, thread by thread, and a number of men who never learned why their orders had suddenly changed went home to their families at the end of their rotations instead of coming home under a flag. Wesley Kane left the hospital on his own 2 feet 11 weeks later, leaning on a cane he was already plotting to throw away, a ghost walking back into the shadows he came from. He stopped at the door of the surgical ICU on his way out, in civilian clothes that hung wrong on a frame built for a uniform. And he found the unremarkable night nurse charting at the station, and he didn't say anything dramatic, because men like him don't. He just put a folded scrap of paper on the counter in front of her, a 5x5 grid, a tap cipher, and under it, in block letters, 4 words she had to work out one knuckle at a time before she understood them. "I owe you everything." Then he was gone. Margot Kessler went back to her charts. She went back to her quiet, forgettable face, and her knot of hair that was always coming loose, and her 6 years of nursing that everyone could see, and her 7 years before that which no one could. She traded the languages of dying men for the slow, honest rhythm of healing ones. And she never told a soul what had happened in that room, and the next night she came in early, the way she always did, and she put her hands on the living. 2 people brought together for 1 hour by a string of taps against a bed rail and a call sign 3 years old. One of them spent his life learning how to disappear so that others could be found. The other spent hers learning how to listen so closely that she could hear a man calling for help in a language he wasn't speaking out loud. And in the end, the thing that pulled Wesley Kane back from the far edge of the dark was not a drug and not a surgeon, and not all the machines money can buy. It was the oldest medicine there is. The sound of someone reaching into the deepest, most locked-down room a frightened man can build, and saying, in a voice he finally believed, "I've got you, brother. You can come home now."